organization. And so we have Specialist 4, Jake Boyd, who's going to talk to us about what it is the Space Force is, what his experience has been, and to answer any questions everybody may have. So, Jake?
We're all set, Bill? Need this? Oh, over here? Okay. All set?
Just real quick test. All right, everything sounds good. Hi, as the gentleman here said, I'm Specialist Jake Boyd, coming from Buckley Space Force Base. I've been in the Space Force for 3 years, and my contract is next January. But as for what I'm here for, obviously, here to talk about the Space Force, what we do, some of the history, and as well as what lies in the future for the Space Force. Obviously, I'm sure some of you guys are interested to learn about what we do, but I'm honestly a lot more interested to hear about some of the great things that you guys have done in the past, as well as looking forward to what I can learn. Now, with that being said, let's end the presentation. So, introduction. So, the Space Force was established December 20th, 2019. It operates as a department underneath the Air Force, similar to what the Marines are to the Navy. Its mission statement is to ensure U.S. space dominance, national security, and support for military operations. So again, similar to the Air Force, where we want to maintain air superiority over there, we want to maintain space superiority in space. Some of the earliest military space efforts, as far as we're aware, the first one was the Cold War kicked off the space race with Sputnik in 1957. And after the Sputnik launch, the military realized the potential importance space has in the future, as well as the practical effects it could have in that moment. Some of the effects it would have on conflicts, which led to direct development of reconnaissance, navigation, and missile warning satellites. Some key programs were Corona. It was the first spysat used for photo reconnaissance. Midas, early missile warning sats that were used to detect Soviet ICBM launches. And Transit, the first navigation system used by the US Navy, and is also a precursor to modern-day GPS systems. As a side note, is there any Intel guys here? Anywhere? Intel? Oh, awesome. So you actually might know about this. So one of the earlier one of the earlier forms of Intel was they would fly a Blackbird above like wherever they would need to get info, and they would actually take pictures, which is kind of like a precursor to like modern day sats. And they would take the pictures, and they literally have to drop them from thousands and thousands of feet up in the air, and have to have another plane come and like snag them, where they would come and process them here in the U.S. Okay. As for some of the growth of space capabilities, the development of GPS, missile warning systems. The Gulf War was the first real-world use for a lot of the more modern-day space systems. So it was considered one of the first space war, so to speak. Again, first real-world operation that demonstrated the realities, having such an overwhelming advantage that space gave us. And it was one of the and Desert Storm, for example, was one of the first one of the most successful military operations to date. It enabled precision-guided munitions on exact enemy troop locations, enemy combatant surveillance, and detection, and caused enemy mental fatigue due to having no familiarity as how we were tracking them, especially in times of inclement weather. And SATCOM was known as the backbone of the operations. So, for example, oh yes, sir, no problem.
Skipped over our war. That's my comment.
Oh, okay.
Go forward.
As for some of the earlier space commands, Air Force Space Command managed military space operations before the Space Force was officially a thing. The US military first established a strategic level military space command in 1982. Again, kind of post-Vietnam, whenever they realized that there may be a lot of tactical applications to space. The US government began to take swifter action on bolstering military space capabilities due to the actions of some of our potential adversaries, such as China and Russia. China and Russia first established their own strategic level military space commands in 2015, so we were ahead of the curve, so to speak. They have continued to develop capabilities such as anti-satellite weapons, electronic and cyber warfare capabilities, and space-based counter-space weapons, and development of hypersonic technologies. As for the creation of the Space Force, on December 20th, 2019, Acting President Trump signed the fiscal year 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, establishing the U.S. Space Force as its own branch of service. It dedicated a lot more resources for space-based operations. For example, some of the issues we were having at that time, because Space Force wasn't its own branch, it couldn't get its own funding. So a lot of the space-based missions that the Air Force had control over at the time were not getting the proper funding, and therefore we were falling behind our potential adversaries. That was the big reason. And we've even found articles from high-acting military members from as well as the early 2000s saying that we should have had this branch. So one of the most well-known capabilities is our GPS, or Global Positioning System. The US owns all of the GPS satellites, although other countries have their own similar systems with admittedly pretty mixed results. GPS is pretty widely known to be the best and is considered the gold standard. For civilian use, it can get anywhere within 1 to 3 yards for the margin for error, and for military usage, it has as little as 1 feet for margin for error. I'm sure some people might use it for stuff like Google Maps, but obviously, because we own it, it has tactical applications as well. Little fun fact, apparently in, I want to say the early 2000s, the Russians actually tried to make their own version of GPS, and whenever they were in the fields, all of their commanders were saying that it was working great, only to realize that they had bought US GPS systems to navigate their own stuff because theirs was so bad. Missile warning and defense. So Space Delta 4, SPD4, that is the Delta that I fall under. Our job is to detect missile launches, support defense strategies for all branches, and it was founded on July 24th, just 7 months after the founding of the Space Force. Its primary job is conducting strategic and theater missile warnings. My unit specifically, 3rd SCS, or 3rd Satellite Communication Squadron, handles the majority of the SATCOM section of this mission, and we help ensure signal strength, sat health, and crucial repairs should anything ever go down. One of the main things that the Space Force took over was a lot of the intel capabilities of the Air Force, although it still has some of its own, obviously. As the Space Force expands, we are always looking to increase our mission set if it makes sense within our capabilities. One of the biggest things we handle is ISR, and we have many resources dedicated to ensure we always have the edge on our adversaries. Again, speaking earlier, GPS stuff like that. We have hundreds of GPS, or not GPS. We have hundreds of intel sats, always making sure that we have the edge over our adversaries, such as China and Russia. Some advantages that this provides us are real-time intelligence for battlefield commanders and track adversary movements, as discussed previously with the Gulf War and stuff like Operation Desert Storm. Space Situational Awareness, or SSA. As more and more countries launch more satellites, it's important to monitor the amount of space debris to avoid collision with potential essential systems. To combat these issues, many satellites have systems in place to detect potential collisions. These systems also help keep track of satellites our adversaries might be sending up, what orbit they are in, and what they could possibly be used for. Cyber and electronic warfare in space. Another essential function of the Space Force is to ensure we have security and dominance in the cyber domain. Some of the Space Force's responsibilities in this domain are defend space assets from cyber attacks, disrupt enemy communication in a wartime scenario, limit their use of our adversaries' own satellites. For example, so one of the big things that the Space Force actually took over, aside from obviously satellites and space stuff, we took over space, intel, and a lot of the cyber jobs from the Air Force, again, because it makes sense within our capabilities if we handle a lot of the SATs that handle those things, so we can get more funding for these programs. Looking to a little bit more towards the future, expanding space operations and the Space Force is an ever-expanding force that is always looking to be forward-thinking. To ensure these ideals are seen through, we're constantly modernizing our space systems, looking to get new talent, as well as educating our own troops and integral commercial space solutions. For like many of my fellow Space Force members, we're always going on stuff like TDYs to ensure that we get the best training, just making sure that we're highly educated in our fields, so we're that much better than our adversaries in their own forces. As for some commercial and allied partnerships, as the Space Force is the newest branch of the military, we often find ourselves having civilian partnerships. Just for a frame of reference, active duty Space Force, I believe there's about 9,000 of us only. And on the civilian end, I think there's 6,000 to 7,000. So it's a fairly small branch. So unfortunately, we do have to have a lot of civilian partnerships and stuff like that. For example, with SpaceX, they assisted us with the previously discussed Rapid Satellite Deployment Program. Blue Origin helps us have a reliable commercial launch capability, allowing us to easier reach higher orbits with their large payload capacity. We work with allied and partner nations regularly to ensure collaboration with other like-minded nations in the space domain. Obviously, if they're allies, we want to help each other out to make sure that, again, we have the edge over our potential adversaries, people looking to do us harm. Some potential future missions. Some of the stuff we're looking towards the future is one of the things we're looking towards in the future in the space domain is the potential for space-based solar power. This is a concept that involves solar energy and either storing it and bringing it back or beaming it, so to speak, straight back down to Earth for easy use, which is pretty on theme, I guess, for Space Force. Obviously, again, if we have other things that make sense in our mission set, this is not just the only thing. We will be looking to bring those over as well. This pretty much concludes the presentation. As far as Q&A, is there any questions at all?
Is there a combat arm for Space Force? Like satellites that will shoot other satellites down?
Not specifically in that regard, to my knowledge at least. I'm sure that there's some program out there that may be working on something like that, but as far as I'm aware, currently no. Because we've found it to just be more practical to work it on like the cyber end of things to potentially. We found it more practical to work on like the cyber end of things to potentially like disrupt other adversaries' SATs/systems. Yes. It can be anything at all. It can be from like my day-to-day to like literally anything Space Force related.
Isn't there technology in the nose of the plane of the F-18 and the F-17 to disrupt with the technology that's in the air above to disrupt any of the...
Are you talking about like anti-jamming stuff?
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure. I know they have anti-jamming stuff, but I'm not 100% sure on like the exact location of it.
Yeah, good morning. Do you folks have any monitoring of the drones, the crazy drones like the size of a car? Do you guys watch over that, or do you?
So my unit specifically, no, we more so help to again ensure the health of the sats. But as for like Space Force as a whole, I would imagine that we would be tracking those things, although I can't speak to it with 100% certainty.
Okay, I got three questions. I'll just run them together, answer what you can. First
Go
is,
ahead, sir.
how do you define an iron dome? Second, do we have one? And thirdly, what do you do about EMP strikes?
When you say Iron Dome,
Okay.
do you mean
One
like?
question at a time.
Okay, Iron Dome, like Israel has, do we have one? If not, is one being built? Can you define that?
Honestly, I'm not too educated on that specifically, sir. That's not like specifically my area of expertise, so I don't want to say anything like out of like that would be incorrect.
Okay, here's one you can answer. How about EMP strikes? Do you have the capability to work with that or work against it?
Yes, sir. So there's a lot of stuff called like it's called like hemp protection or like hardened EMP, and there is systems military wide that would use stuff like that that would protect us from like EMP strikes and stuff like that and similar of nature.
Cool, that's nice to hear. I can sleep now, thanks.
No problem, sir.
Does the Space Force administer spy satellites, and do they have a role in the Ukrainian war?
So we do have a good amount of intel. As for like, are we the ones launching them specifically? I can't speak with 100% certainty on that. I would imagine so, and we do have the capabilities to, with stuff like rapid satellite deployment, which we can build and launch as little as within like 6 to 7 months, which is extremely quickly for building a like $100 million to $1 billion satellite and getting it out. And what was the second part to your question? I'm sorry.
Do you have a role in the Ukrainian war?
The branch, I can't speak. I would imagine that we might provide some assistance, but as for like exacts, I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Do you have capability in watching the anti-drone capabilities of the other enemies that are out there that are flying without their drones?
Because we do have, as for specifics, I can't answer, but rest assured, like we do have, as previously stated, like a lot of intel capabilities. So I would imagine anything that would potentially be of national safety / security, we would 100% be aware of.
The only reason why I was asking is my daughter's a captain in the Navy, and she flies an F-18 or an F-35. That was the only reason why she flies them for the Navy.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Morning, thank you for your presentation. You said you did temporary duty assignments with civilian. What kind of temporary duties do you guys do?
It's pretty hyper specific to like whatever work center you're at. But a pretty common one is CWO for our cyber guys. So I think it's cyber warfare operations training. That's, I believe, I want to say a 2-month training. And for any of our systems specifically that we work with that I can't get into, we do training for like more extended training for those specifically as well.
Is there a new command center for the space
Force out eastern Colorado, east of Colorado Springs. They're building a big facility out there. Are you aware of that?
I don't know about a new command, so to speak, but the command that we currently have is always trying to expand like as much as they can in the springs. So that might be kind of what you're seeing, but I'm not 100% certain.
At our first Signal Brigade reunion 10 years ago at Fort Huachuca, they had a drone command center there directing drones in Afghanistan. Do you coordinate with the U.S. Army on those missions?
For drones mission specifically,
Yes.
I don't believe so. At least not us. At least not like my section specifically. We might have other sections that communicate with them, but for my section specifically, no. I do work with Army, but it's more for maybe some SATCOM stuff on their end that we work together on.
Do they still use the golf balls out at Buckley for radar tracking?
Yes, sir. I work with those.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your service.
Thank you for yours as well, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. Does the Space Force sponsor any ROTC units?
I'm actually not too sure about that. I want to say no, at least for our base, to my knowledge, but I can't speak for like the force as a whole.
And then is there an aviation component of the Space Force, or do you just rely on the Air Force for that?
We rely on the Air Force for that. Yeah, we do rely on the Air Force for that. It just makes sense. We just do what each of us would be better at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
There's a book called The Next 100 Years by a guy by the name of Friedman. And in that book, and the reason I mention this is I would think it falls under your purview. It talks about how, among other things, the Chinese are trying to build a base on the far side of the moon, and how the next big war will be fought in space. If you think about it, if they shut down our satellites, we're pretty much screwed. I probably can't find my way home. Anyway, that's it. The book, The Next 100 Years by Friedman. I'd recommended reading it. Thank you.
I'll look into it, sir.
My last question, was the astronauts that were left in space, they were said they were supposed to be up there for just only 10, 15 days, but they've been up there for like 8 months. Was that just practice for them being up there?
I'm honestly not familiar with that, ma'am. I'm aware of the situation, but as for like what the Space Force is doing, I'm not aware.
Get my exercise.
I'm 80 years old, so I know it can't apply, but what are the requirements to join the Space Force, and what are you looking for mostly as far as recruits?
Pretty similar to the Air Force. We are pretty selective with like our ASVAB scores. So for example, like my ASVAB score, I want to say was like an 85 or for example. And I think the bare minimum to get in, I want to say is either 67 or 70, like that, something like that. So we do demand like a higher, I hate phrasing it like this, but typically a higher like intellectual demand.
4-year college, 2 years, any college?
I did like dual enrollment in high school, so I took a lot of college classes in high school, so I had a lot of credits going in. And a lot of my like coworkers and stuff, they have like mechanical engineering degrees, other electrical engineering, like cyber degrees. Like they're pretty smart people.
Question on Front Range Airport. I live out there. I see the signs. What section of Space Command operates out there at Front Range Airport?
I'm honestly not sure, sir. I'm sorry.
Why did they rename the Front Range Airport over to Spaceport?
I'm honestly not sure about the Front Range Airport, sir. I'm sorry.
It's just outside of Denver International's airspace, underneath it.
All right. I'm not super familiar. I'm sorry.
Okay, I've got one, Bill?
I know that our GPS guided weapons have a backup. In other words, they don't require strictly on GPS. My question is, does the Space Force or the Air Force have a whole bunch of GPS satellites sitting on a shelf somewhere that will replace the ones that the Chinese are going to take out?
Well, hopefully the Chinese don't get to take them out. As for if we have spares, I'm not 100% sure. I would imagine that we would have some like subsystem in place to ensure that obviously we have full GPS capabilities and we're able to navigate around effectively.
Just a quick question about the Space Force. Do they share information with the other branches of the military?
Yes, sir. I actually work pretty regularly, for example, with Army and Air Force. We do work pretty closely with them depending on their mission set.
Now, you're in the Air Force?
Space Force.
Okay, then.
I came in straight as Space Force. I was never Air Force.
Okay, do you have a special rank different than the Air Force?
Yes, sir. So I'm Specialist 4, which is our E4 equivalent.
Okay.
It literally just goes Specialist 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Sergeant for like E1 through 5.
Okay, all right.
I'm not smart enough to ask a technical question. Just real quick, Jake, where is the Space Force? Is it just at Buckley? Is it around the country? Where are the bases?
We have a lot in Colorado. I think technically speaking, or 3 exactly, and kind of middling on 4 in Colorado if you include the academy, because we train Space Force officers there as well. We have bases in California, Florida. We have some in Washington, or at the very least attachments. We have some in Hawaii. We have some in Germany, and there's other places where I'm not 100% sure about.
Okay, well, thank you. So you're all over the world in multiple locations, not just Buckley then?
Yes, sir. We're ever expanding.
Okay. Any more questions? No? Jake, thank you very much. Really appreciate your comments and education.